Okay, we're back. So, Captain Beefheart, as John said, is a very interesting dude. And
you can quote me on that.
Yes. He's a very cool dude. John Walt. He was born Don Glenn Vliet in 1941 in Glendale, California. He died December 7th, 2010 at the age of 69. His band was known as the Magic Band and was a rotating ensemble. That is important because it was literally rotating because it seemingly changed from album to album and then sometimes while recording albums. He was known for combining free jazz, blues, rock, and avant-garde music. He started out as a child. He had an interest in sculpting and painting to the point where he worked with a local tutor and who said he was a child prodigy. However, his parents discouraged him from sculpting and even declined several scholarships for him to study sculpting in Europe. I didn't get a lot of background on what his parents were like or why they were so against him sculpting, but I think this early experience and his relationship with his parents shaped him in the future.
In fairness, though, Captain Beefheart as an engineer would not be as successful a moniker.
Right.
So,
I think
Do you think
Go ahead,
if he had a different art form, like was it sculpting specifically, or was it just he wanted to pursue the arts? Or they just have like a weird, like
they just valued STEM education more, I believe, is what it was, Matt.
Yeah. I mean, he was interested in painting too, to the point where that's what he pursued later on for the rest of his life after he stopped being in the band in the 80s. Actually, his paintings are quite valuable, apparently. He moved to the Mojave Desert as a teen in this town called Lancaster, California, with his parents, and developed his taste in music with blues acts like Robert Johnson, John Coltrane, Son House, Muddy Waters, and Howlin' Wolf. This is also where, in high school, he became friends with Frank Zappa. He would later compete and collaborate with him. I like to think of them as frenemies. He and Zappa moved to Cucamonga, California later on after high school, where they
was that like Camp Cucamonga, the TV movie special with like Steve Urkel and Winnie Cooper? Do you remember that?
Oh no, I don't remember.
Nobody saw it. You don't see Camp Cucamonga?
I think I know what you're talking about, but I don't remember that specific TV movie.
It must be the same place.
Yeah, probably.
Please go on, Josh.
Please go on, Josh. I just had to put that out there. I mean, I can't be the only one that saw that.
I'll bring that up on Cleaning the Stacks next week.
There you go.
They moved to Cucamonga, and they recorded some songs, and they were going to shoot a film titled Captain Beefheart versus the Grunt People, but that went nowhere. That was the first appearance of the name of Captain Beefheart as well. There seems to be multiple accounts of where the name came from, and all of them seem suspect. The bottom line is that Frank Zappa seemed to have created it in collaboration with Don Van Vliet.
I saw Frank Zappa gave an interview when I was doing my research for the Mothers of Invention, and he mentioned that it was actually after, I guess, Captain Beefheart's uncle, who gave maybe it was his penis the nickname of Captain Beefheart.
Yeah.
And flashed them or something like that?
I mean, let's be honest. It was almost certain to be phallic in nature. I mean, it had to.
But it was like a weird story where his uncle was flashing him, and I'm like, there's more to that's more serious than what you're making it seem like it is.
In the 50s and 60s, you buried that shit hard, Matt. You know what I mean? Stuff that didn't come out.
I mean, not to get on too much of a tangent, but I think his uncle left the door open when he was going to the bathroom. That's what I read or something. And then the aunt would walk by and he would make some crude joke the uncle did or whatever. That was one of the things I heard.
We were going to drag that story out of you, Josh, and you were trying to be so polite. And we're going to make sure that we earn that explicit moniker that we put on our
listeners demand listeners demand the truth.
Hey, I can talk about beef hearts all day. That's fine.
Continue though.
After not really doing anything in Cucamonga, Zappa moved to Los Angeles and formed the Mothers of Invention. Don went back to Mojave and became Captain Beefheart and formed the first iteration of the Magic Band in 1965. This is where he changed his name to Don Van Vliet as well legally, so from Glenn to Van in the middle there. The Magic Band and him signed to A&M Records at this time. They had 2 singles, one successful cover called Diddy Wah Diddy, which is pretty catchy, and the other titled Moonchild, which both of those were released in 1966. Moonchild was not as successful. Then they recorded demos for what would become Safe as Milk. However, the A&M co-founder Jerry Moss, and A&M is Jerry Moss and Herb Alpert of the Tijuana Brass, said that the direction of the band was, quote, too negative, and they were dropped by the label. By the end of 1966, they signed to Buddha Records, which is based out of New York, I read, and is also spelled incorrectly. During the late... I guess they later fixed it, or when Sony bought them, they changed it back. Or
they apparently weren't magic spellers, were they? Just the Magic Band, yeah.
During this late 1966 period, Ry Cooder joined the Magic Band at the ripe old age of 20. And already then he was considered a guitar prodigy. In the spring of 1967, they started recording the actual album outside of those initial demos, and the album was released in September of 1967. So this album is their first album. I didn't say that at the beginning. The album failed to chart in the US, and in fact none of their albums ever cracked the top 100, either in the US or the UK. So this is really very much a band that is what would be considered a cult classic if it was a movie, the underground band, I guess you could say.
Would you say that Captain Beefheart was a grower for his audience, Josh?
Yes, I would.
Okay. Yes.
Especially among artists, he's very influential, like a lot of the bands that we've talked about, but not successful necessarily with the general public. And I'm really going to stop there because this is their first album, and we're going to discuss one other album of theirs, which is considered the magnum opus of Captain Beefheart, and I'll give a little bit more of the later background about that and how things ended up with Captain Beefheart. I do have some fun facts, though, and some trivia. I got a Beatles Corner reference for you, Matt. Oh. Both Lennon and McCartney were fans of Captain Beefheart. However, Captain Beefheart was critical of the Beatles and notably made fun of them on his follow-up album Strictly Personal, and the song was called Beatle Bones and Smokin' Stones. And
so he and Zappa shared that sort of ironic disregard for the Beatles. I should say.
I think so, yeah.
Did he did Captain Beefheart have any run-ins with McCartney or Lennon that you read about, Josh, at all?
Yeah, in fact, he did. Apparently, they hung. There's some story that he tells where he hung out with McCartney, but then McCartney says that he never remembers it happening. So he did interact with both of them, though, at one point or another. There's also a story of him writing a letter to Lennon and Yoko Ono in support of their love-in, and then they never responded or something like that, and so then he got mad about that as well.
He took that personal?
Yeah. I read that as well. This is interesting. They were supposed to be in the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967. During a warm-up performance the week before at a different venue, Vliet suffered severe anxiety attacks that convinced them that he was having a heart attack. He froze up on stage and then proceeded to walk straight off the 10-foot stage and fell onto their manager.
Ouch.
So as a result, they did not play Monterey Pop. Ry Cooder also left the band after this happened, saying that Captain Beefheart was too self-destructive in the drama, and they would this would prevent them from having success if they can't even, get their act together enough to perform.
So, when I had the visual of Captain Beefheart writing a heartfelt letter to John and Yoko Ono, now I get one of him face planting off of a stage.
This also gets back to the constant personnel changes of the band. Apparently, he was famously difficult to work with, and I did watch an old BBC documentary about Captain Beefheart from the 90s, and this confirms that as well. Also, our friend Jimmy Carl Black, the Indian of the group, he was also in the Magic Band at one point, and he was in the documentary, so I saw him in person, which was hilarious.
I swear in the 60s it was like the same 250 people were just alternating on everybody's albums, as we'll find out in a later album too.
Josh, was Jimmy Carl Black the Indian of this group too, or did he have competition?
There is some sort of like parentheses names for him that said he's the Indian. So I think he was the Indian of this group as well.
Gotcha.
And this is for John. This is a trivia question.
Okay.
One of your favorite bands has covered Electricity on a deluxe version of their album in 2007. Do you know what band I am referring to?
Ooh. I believe, did Sonic Youth cover them?
Ding, ding, ding. You are
Yes.
correct, sir.
I was going to say Van Halen.
He did not feed me that question either, but I do know Sonic Youth do like Frank Zappa and Captain Beefheart. So
Yep. Apparently they covered that for there was a Captain Beefheart tribute album in the UK or something, and that was never released by Sonic Youth, and then so that was on that.
I'll have to search for that.
So that is it. The lineup of the group at this time when Safe as Milk came out is Don Van Vliet. He played vocals. He knew how to play harmonica. He was on the arrangements as well. Alex St. Clair Snoofer was guitar and backing vocals. Ry Cooder was on guitar, slide guitar, bass, and some other things, and arrangements as well. Jerry Hanley was on bass, and John French was on drums. And that changes, as I said, shortly after this, to the point where they couldn't even get a steady guitarist, it seemed like, to match Ry Cooder's ability. And that's all for the bio. How did you guys react to this album? And was it as safe as milk?
Go ahead, Matt. I'll let you start.
Well, I have to start by saying I really didn't know anything about this Captain Beefheart. I knew the name thrown around here and there, but never knew any songs, so this was all new to me. And I thought this album was cool as hell, man. This was a great listen from the get-go. This was not something that I needed to listen to over and over again, although I did, but I didn't need to do it to realize that I liked it. It's great. There's a lot of I like the production of it. It's got a very lo-fi type quality to it, and it's very bluesy. It's got some cool like southern kind of slide guitar rock going on, and I could totally see artists doing stuff like this today. It reminded me of guys like J.D. McPherson, if you know that guitar player, or even Mayer Hawthorne, or Nathaniel Rateliff. You know, it's kind of like a southern rock, bluesy kind of style, but it's done in this production that's very it's got edge to it, you know, and
Definitely.
His voice is great. You know, he's got this kind of crazy, chaotic voice. And it really comes out in something like Electricity, where he's just the effect that he's doing with his voice is just over the top, kind of creepy, scary kind of a thing. And there's some doo-wop in here, like what is it? I'm Glad is a very kind of like doo-wop-y, almost kind of something that you could, you know, it's almost like an Amy Winehouse type of song, you know, with the backgrounds, the music that's going on here. But this was a fun listen. This is great. This is borderline Pretty Things for me in terms of my level of surprise and my level of enjoyment. I don't think there was a dud on here. If I had to pick a song that might not have hit me as much as the other ones, it probably would be the last track, Autumn's Child. But even that was still good. I think that one's a little bit different. It's got kind of an interesting choral part. I don't know how to describe it, but like an echoey choral part. But no, this was this was a really cool record, and it made me want to listen to more. So big thumbs up from me.
I read a review that said that Autumn's Child reference, which is the last track, was very much in the Pink Floyd vein. I don't know if you saw that at all.
It's a little bit more of an avant-garde kind of a thing.
Yeah.
I didn't pick up Pink Floyd when I heard it, but just thinking about that off the top of my head, it's not terribly shocking, but it is a little bit of a different sound than the other songs. But this is just like a dirty rock record, you know, like a bluesy bar, like just fun. And then there's some avant-garde stuff in here too, but yeah, I'll leave it at that for right now. John, what about you?
I really like this album quite a bit. I think I got a different vibe off of it. It definitely has a blues. I mean, the verse song sounds like when you talked about him listening to Robert Johnson. Sure enough, and Yes I Do sounds like he's just taking a modern version of Robert Johnson from when we covered him before with better production and a little bit more going on. By the time we get to Dropout Boogie and I'm Glad, I know that you said, I forget how you described I'm Glad. To me, it was like early 60s.
Soul.
Not even soul. It's like almost like girl group, like production pop music sound.
I was saying like doo-wop.
Yeah, doo-wop would be a good description, I think, too. It almost sounds of the late 50s and early 60s, the type of pop that was being produced there. I love that the album wanders all over the place, and I actually was impressed by how good he was at the different things that he did, because it would seem as if when you're veering around this way, especially after you hear how he does blues, which is strong, you might say, well, maybe stay in that lane for a little bit more, but there's a blues underpinning of it the entire time. And I didn't love the last song, Autumn's Child, which also is the longest song on the track, but Nothing Overstays Its Welcome, which is, I know, something we use quite a bit. And yeah, as you mentioned, Matt, a lot of the things you said are the things that I would say. The production was really good. And Captain Beefheart's voice it can sound like he's a different singer depending on the song that he's doing, which is something that I love in frontmen to begin with. So I have to say, yeah, I love the song Abba Zaba, which kind of comes out of nowhere at track 8. I also found the lyrics to be pretty funny in some of the songs, especially as the album went on. When There's Woman and Grown So Ugly in particular, where Grown So Ugly was pretty funny, and then When There's Woman was actually Where There's Woman, was actually a pretty strong song lyrically too. So yep, definitely would give this thumbs up. And like you, Matt, I wasn't super familiar with Captain Beefheart, and so this was I wouldn't say a pleasant surprise, because I went in with no idea of how I was going to feel about it, but it definitely was nice to have this week as something to listen to. Is a very easy thing to listen to 2 or 3 times as well.
Was Grown So Ugly the one where he just kept going, I got out of bed and looked in the mirror, and he's just describing what he does in the morning?
You got it. Yes.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. It's like, are you going to do anything interesting? I brushed my teeth. It's like...
Yeah, that's a cover of a Robert Pete Williams song, and the Black Keys also covered that on Rubber Factory.
Yes, Black Keys. That's another band that's absolutely.
Yeah. And I was going to say the Black Keys owe
definitely
some of their sound to this. Yeah, it's very Black Keysian.
But that's I like that term, Black Keysian. That's good. No, but I like that this is it doesn't. I know I've said this before, I like albums that are older albums to not sound dated. I think that just is kind of, it seems a little bit more ahead of its time if it's able to not latch on too much to the sound of what's, the popular thing going on at that time. And whereas there are some songs that definitely have kind of like that 60s psychedelic rock kind of thing a little bit, it's done in a way that I could totally see bands today trying to recapture some of that stuff, but done in more of a modern twist. So I see a little bit of both of that. It's definitely 60s, but it's also definitely like garage rock. Like Black Keys is a great example. I didn't think of that till you said it, John, but that's absolutely right. So I think that's cool. There's lots of crossover, and I think this is something that I could see. This is more of a timeless type of sound, I think, and it was a lot of fun. It's great, man. It's great to dance to. My daughter was loving it. She's 2, so right on.
Yeah, I was a little apprehensive before I started listening to this, because I think John had offhandedly mentioned the association with Frank Zappa, so I was expecting something really avant-garde, but I really like this album, and I think it's one of my favorites so far. I kept coming back to the songs. They were really catchy. I love his growling voice, and how he, like John said, can change from song to song. Apparently he had a 4-octave range too, which I don't really know what that means, but
that's a big impressive range.
Yeah. I love how bluesy it is. I think of this as desert acid blues, he's on drugs but he's in the desert, so it's a little more mellow, and you can see the influence from all of his blues, the Chicago blues that he had, and the Southern blues, and even things like just the very different things, like having the theremin on electricity, and the different variety of songs and how
I'm sorry, go ahead, Josh. I apologize. I was gonna add something.
I was just gonna say, even something like "Call of Me," which sounds like a Rolling Stone song to me almost. I think that's the third track, maybe.
"Call of Me," yep.
And every song was like just different enough to be like a little surprise, and there's always like a catchy hook or something that the first time you hear it, you're like, what is this? And then you hear it again and it's really great. Like Yellow Brick Road is so jaunty, and then it drops into this dark like chorus with like a weird guitar lick that's so good. And I really like this album. Now I will couch that in saying that this is everything I've read said this is his most accessible album, and that the next album we're going to hear is going to be really avant-garde and not like this. So I will, if nothing else, I like this album. So
gotcha. Well, I'll give some things I was thinking of while we were saying it too. I think, as Josh mentioned, if you were talking about the Stones that Josh is referencing, I want you to think of like Heart of Stone, Fortune Teller, covering old blues songs type Stones. So for those that are familiar with the Stones, that's a little bit of what the Stones overlap sounds like, not the Let It Bleed, Sticky Fingers Stones. I think it calls back to a little bit of an earlier bluesy sound of the Stones.
Yeah,
I will tell you some bands that, if you like them, are a little bit in debt to this sound. If you like Caius or the Queens of the Stone Age, you can draw a pretty straight line from how this sounds into the type of blues-driven rock, just plugged in a little bit more, that they make. I would also say a band like Black Rebel Motorcycle Club takes quite a bit of this sound as well. So if you're familiar with any of those bands, especially any of the Josh Homme projects, I think I would be shocked if they were not influenced both lyrically and sonically.
Also,
by, Captain Beefheart's work.
Another guy who lives in the desert. So I wonder if that's a common thread.
Mm-hmm. So there you go.
I think what is cool about this too is the avant-garde aspect of it, because there is some. It's certainly not as avant-garde as like the Frank Zappa album, and and other things that we might have heard of. But it's also done in a way that I tend to really gravitate towards the avant-garde, because it's done slightly. It's done a little bit in the background, but it's all couched in more of a melody and more of an accessible sound. And so I think that's really the sweet spot for me. But with songs like Electricity, which parts are really kind of almost grating, but then there's this guitar part in the background that just holds on to you, right? That you can really keep up with the song, even though his voice is kind of really going in this direction that otherwise would be very off-putting.
Mm-hmm. We've listened to 3 albums that I would call avant-garde right now, and ironically, I wouldn't even call the Frank Zappa album we listened to avant-garde, because I think he was going for something different, right? It was basically a parody album. Later, as we'll see, he goes in a different direction. But the United States of America, that Monks album, Matt, that we covered,
right,
Cleaning the Attic, was definitely avant-garde, and then that Pink Floyd album. And this is avant-garde, but in a very different way than those 3 albums, a very different way. And so in that sense, it's an avant-garde, but still grounded very much in traditional music, blues.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
In a way that some of the other avant-garde music, and certainly the music that's labeled as avant-garde in the 70s, seems as if it came from a totally different sonic context. So I do think it's important to mention that if you hear avant-garde and you're like, oh man, it's going to be, ethereal or sort of post-rock, or the type of stuff that was being done in the 70s by Brian Eno or Roxy Music, or even krautrock. It's not like that at all. It's very much moored in the blues tradition. Mm-hmm. So I did want to throw that out there. Even unlike the United States of America, which was not moored to any of those traditions.
And this is much more, like Josh said, this is much more accessible than all those other records. You could put this on in a bar. You could put this on, in a variety of places, and it's not like people are going to turn around and be like, "What the hell is this?" It's going to maybe a couple of parts, but people will be able to get down to this, I think.
Right. Yeah,
I agree. I think it sounds like we're all very positive on this album. It was a very pleasant surprise for me.
If you're someone unfamiliar with it and you're looking for albums from what we cover to add into your repertoire and give a shot to, you could do a lot worse than giving this one a shot.
All right.
Josh, I know we're going to get into more of his stuff later on, but what was his output extensive? Did he do a lot of stuff? Did he kind of fall away? Like, do you have any sense of what the future was like for him?
Well, it seems like he made albums pretty consistently. The next album that we'll be talking about is a double album, Trout Mask Replica, which has a crazy cover. And then he made albums all through the 70s, and he retired after his last album in 1982. So if you look at his discography, he has a lot of albums.
Well, cool. I'll have to check some of them out. Well, glad we're doing one more, but what'd you say? It's not on Spotify, so we're going to have to get creative about how we listen to it?
Yeah, not from what I saw. So
Gotcha.
we'll discuss that off air.
There you go.